I remember coaching this woman, beautiful, smart, successful. But the moment this guy started pulling away, she started pulling herself apart. She was analyzing every message, rereading every conversation, wondering if she'd said the wrong thing or not said enough. And I stopped her and asked, why is his silence louder than your self-worth? That's the trap, isn't it? We turn their indifference into a puzzle we obsess over solving instead of a red flag we walk away from. Today, I'm not here to teach you how to get him back. I'm here to teach you how to become the woman he regrets ever letting go, because you didn't beg, you didn't chase, you didn't try to prove yourself. You walked, and you did it with power. There's something deeply human about wanting to be seen, to be validated, especially by someone we've emotionally invested in. But here's the trap. When a man starts to pull away, many women instinctively rush in to close the gap. You send the follow-up text. You post the perfectly curated story. You replay the last interaction in your mind 100 times, wondering what you missed. All of this feeds his ego. Not because he's evil or manipulative, but because the attention tells him he still has a gravitational pull in your world. And ego, like any parasite, only thrives when it's fed. I remember being in a situation myself where I had distanced from someone, not because I didn't care, but because I wasn't ready to commit. And do you know what kept me feeling in control? Her response. She kept showing up, reaching out, proving her worth. And it wasn't love. I felt it was power. The moment she stopped responding, when the messages stopped, when her energy disappeared from my life completely, that's when the echo hit. That silence wasn't empty. It was defining. We think silence means weakness. But in emotional dynamics, it's a weapon of strength, because it tells someone, you no longer have access to my attention, and that access was a privilege. You don't need to make noise to be powerful. In fact, the moment you stop reacting, you become untouchable. He can't measure your silence, can't interpret it, can't control it. And that more than any dramatic goodbye or emotional pleas, what begins to chip away at his certainty and starts building your value in his mind. Silence isn't the absence of love, it's the presence of self-respect. People often overestimate the value of what they say and underestimate the value of where they choose not to be. We live in a time where communication is constant, where the impulse is to clarify, to defend, to explain ourselves into being understood. But here's the deeper truth. When someone begins to take your presence for granted, it's not your words that shift the dynamics, it's your absence. Years ago, I had a friend who ended a long-term relationship. She drafted text after text, trying to explain why she deserved more, why his behavior hurt her, why he needed to understand. None of it changed him. He replied, sometimes coldly, sometimes not at all. But the moment she stopped texting, stopped showing up at events he might be at, stopped living with him in mind, that's when the regret started. Not because she said the perfect thing, but because she stopped saying anything at all. Her absence was deafening. It wasn't a performance. It was a decision. And it's important to note, this isn't about manipulation. It's about power not over another person, but power over your own energy, your own standards. When you remove yourself from a space where you're not valued, you force people to face a vacuum they didn't know your presence filled. That vacuum, that silence, becomes their mirror. It reflects what they lost without you having to lift a finger. Wealth, whether emotional or financial, is generated not through frantic effort, but through the discipline of where we invest. If someone doesn't see your worth when you're giving, let them feel it when you're gone. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not be there. One of the most paralyzing illusions we entertain is the belief that closure is something another person owes us. That somehow, if they just explained why they changed, why they left, why they didn't show up when it mattered, we'd finally be able to move on. But this mindset creates a dependency one. that places your emotional resolution in the hands of the very person who disrupted it. Closure, in reality, isn't something you wait to receive. It's something you must claim for yourself. I've worked with individuals who spent years frozen in emotional limbo, not because they didn't understand what happened, but because they were still waiting for someone else to make it make sense. One man told me he just needed his ex to admit that she gave up too early. Another woman believed that if her partner just acknowledged the damage he caused, she could finally stop obsessing over it. But here's what I've learned, both through them and through my own experience. The people who hurt you rarely give you the resolution you're seeking. Not because they're cruel, but because they're incapable. Their silence, their absence, their refusal to provide answers is the answer. When someone leaves you in confusion, your task isn't to decode it, it's to stop giving it room to define you. Your healing can't be held hostage by someone else's maturity or lack of it. Emotional wealth, like financial wealth, is built on ownership. You must own your story, even the chapters that end without explanation. Waiting for clarity from someone who broke your heart is like waiting for a thief to return and apologize for what they took. You don't need a final conversation to move on. You just need to finally decide that your peace matters more than their explanation. There's something deeply psychological about the way we leave doors open for people who have already chosen to walk away. We call it being mature, staying friends, being open to someday. But really what we're doing is postponing the grief. We're avoiding the finality. And in doing so, we rob ourselves of the clarity and forward momentum we need to grow. I've seen it countless times in both men and women keeping communication lines slightly cracked open, replying to the occasional late night message, responding politely to just checking in texts, all under the illusion of peace. But there's no peace in that. There's only quiet chaos. Every time you respond, you're not just replying to a text, you're signaling that they still have emotional access to you. That their departure didn't have consequences. And that access is a currency. It's a form of emotional wealth. If you give it freely to someone who's already demonstrated they don't value it, you're bankrupting yourself. Years ago, I was in a relationship where after things ended, we kept this illusion of friendship. I told myself it was healthy, that it proved we were both evolved. But every interaction left me spinning, questioning, waiting. It wasn't friendship, it was a leash. And when I finally cut it, when I stopped answering, when I removed her from my digital world and stopped making exceptions, that's when I healed. Not because she changed, but because I did. We talk so much about setting boundaries, but few people realize that boundaries not enforced are just suggestions. If someone walks out, let the door close behind them. Don't wedge your foot in it hoping they'll come back differently. Because the longer you keep it open, the longer you delay the life that's waiting to begin on the other side. There's a dangerous temptation in wanting to be the exception, the one person who finally makes him change, who breaks through his walls, who teaches him how to love right. But the problem is, when you strive to be the exception, you're often excusing behavior that shouldn't be excused. You become the woman who tolerates more, waits longer, gives more chances than anyone else would, and in doing so, you don't become special. You become available for treatment that doesn't match your worth. The reality is this: people don't change because someone was endlessly patient with their inconsistency. They change because they're forced to confront the consequences of their actions. When you stay through repeated disrespect, when you absorb broken promises, hoping that love will make them whole, you're teaching them that they can give you less and still keep you. That's not a message of love. That's a message of surrender, of forfeiting your value in hopes of being chosen. In my own life, I've watched this unfold, not just romantically, but in business partnerships, friendship 7 in mentoring relationships. When you overextend, when you adjust your standards in hopes that someone will finally step up, they don't see it as grace. They see it as permission. And it was only when I finally held the line, when I removed myself from the equation entirely, that real change ever took place, if it happened at all. You don't become unforgettable by tolerating what others wouldn't. You become unforgettable when you walk away at the exact moment they assumed you never would. When you stop trying to be the exception and choose to be the lesson, you become the standard they measure every other connection against, not because you begged for it, but because you refuse to settle for less. There's a common misunderstanding that love should be this self-sacrificial endeavor where we constantly bend, adjust, and compromise our needs to keep the connection alive. But what's often called flexibility in relationships is, in reality, the slow erosion of standards. And if you have to lower your standards to make a relationship work, then it's not love, it's survival. Because real love does not ask you to shrink. It does not thrive on your silence, your self-abandonment, or your tolerance for inconsistency. I've seen this happen repeatedly with people who are strong in every area of their life's career, friendships, personal goals, but in love, they become smaller. They accept less attention, less honesty, less effort, all under the belief that this is what patience or maturity looks like. But what it actually reveals is a scarcity mindset, the fear that if they walk away, they won't find better. That fear leads to emotional compromise, and over time, it builds resentment, not intimacy. I once mentored a young woman who was incredibly sharp, driven, and principled until she fell into a dynamic where every emotional boundary she had slowly disappeared. She justified his neglect by saying he was just figuring himself out. But the truth was, he was figuring out how much she'd accept before she broke, and she thought she was being loving. She wasn't. She was being discounted. You don't generate emotional wealth by giving yourself away in pieces. You do it by holding your value, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's tested. And real love and not fantasy, not infatuation, will rise to meet you at that level. It won't ask you to lower the bar. It will be grateful that you raised it. There's something deeply disorienting about chasing love. You tell yourself you're just being proactive, that you're fighting for what matters, that if you let go too soon, you might miss something great. But the truth is, when you're chasing something or someone, what you're really doing is trying to compensate for their lack of clarity with your own overcommitment. And love, in its healthiest form, doesn't work that way. I've worked with countless people, especially women, who confuse pursuit with connection. They mistake their anxiety for intuition. They believe the emotional highs and lows mean it's real. But when you have to constantly initiate, explain, remind, or prove your value, that's not love. That's emotional labor. And it's a terrible investment of energy, one that yields little return but high emotional cost. In my own life, I've experienced the difference. I once pursued someone who was brilliant and magnetic, but perpetually unavailable. Every time I tried to get closer, she took a step back. I thought if I just figured out the right thing to say or did more to support her, she'd come around. But she didn't, because people don't come around when you chase them. They come around when they're ready. And when they're not, no amount of effort on your part can substitute for that readiness. Chasing is the behavior of someone who has forgotten their worth, and it's unsustainable. Healthy relationships are built on mutual desire, not desperation. If you have to run after it, pull it back, or convince it to stay, then it was never grounded to begin with. The most valuable things in life, emotional, financial, or spiritual, are not the ones you chase, but the ones you attract by being deeply aligned with who you are. If it requires a chase, it's not aligned with your value, it's a distraction from it. Too often, when someone finally chooses to walk away from what no longer serves them, they're labeled cold, bitter, or spiteful. But there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. Self-respect isn't an act of rebellion, it's a form of spiritual hygiene. It's the process of cleansing your life of what contaminates your peace, your energy, and your identity. Just as we protect our health by avoiding toxins, we must protect our spirit by refusing to entertain dynamics that diminish our value. I've seen this confusion firsthand: clients who think setting boundaries is harsh, or that saying no to someone who keeps crossing the line is somehow cruel. But what's cruel is allowing yourself to slowly erode under the weight of someone else's inconsistency. What's unkind is staying in environments that require you to explain why your dignity matters. Saying, "I deserve more," isn't spite. It's the basic upkeep of your self-worth. In my own life, I've had to walk away from both professional and personal relationships, not with anger, but with clarity. I realized the longer I stayed, the more I taught people how to undervalue me. Not through their intent, but through my permission. And when I left, some were shocked. Some even called it selfish. But in truth, it was sacred. Because the more you tolerate what unsettles your spirit, the more disconnected you become from your own center. And if you're disconnected from yourself, you're not building any emotionally, financially, or spiritually. You're leaking energy, and every leak costs you. This isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about no longer proving yourself at all. Walking away doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to protect what you've built inside. And that's not spite. That's self-respect doing its necessary work. There's a cultural phenomenon now where people talk about the glow up as if it's a revenge tactic, as if looking better, earning more, or becoming more confident is only valuable if it gets the attention of the person who let you go. But that's a shallow understanding of transformation. The real glow up isn't a performance for someone else's regret. It's a reclaiming of your identity after you've spent too long shrinking for someone who couldn't see your value. When you start improving yourself just to provoke a reaction from someone who left, you're still orbiting around them. You're still allowing their absence to determine your direction. That's not growth. That's emotional dependence dressed in achievement. And while it may feel empowering in the short term, it's still rooted in lack. It's still saying, "Look what you missed," rather than, "Look what I built because I finally stopped needing your validation." I've seen this dynamic play out not just in relationships, but in my own past. There was a time in my life when my success was partly fueled by resentment. I wanted to prove people wrong, to show them what I was capable of, and I did. But it didn't satisfy me, because all the achievement in the world means nothing if the motive behind it is still wounded. It wasn't until I shifted my focus, started building out of love for my craft, for my life, for the people who stayed, that the results actually brought peace. Growth built on bitterness doesn't last. It burns fast and leaves you empty. But growth built on self-respect, clarity, and genuine ambition, that's wealth. That's something you don't need to post online or parade in front of an ex. It speaks for itself. You don't glow up to be seen. You glow up because you finally see yourself. One of the most liberating truths you'll ever come to understand is this: you don't win when he comes back. You don't win when he watches your stories, texts you after weeks of silence, or finally admits he made a mistake. You win the moment you stop caring whether he ever looks back at all. Why? Because until that moment, your self-worth is still dependent on external validation. It's tied to his opinion, his regret, his attention. And that's a dangerous place to build from, because it means your emotional wealth fluctuates with someone else's indecision. That's not strength. That's emotional volatility disguised as romantic hope. I remember a period in my life when I poured everything into proving myself to someone who had already decided to walk away. I became sharper, more successful, more visible, while secretly hoping they'd take notice. And when they did, it felt good for about a day. But that feeling faded quickly because the truth underneath hadn't changed. I was still performing for their approval, not living from my own conviction. That kind of living isn't freedom. It's just a prettier form of emotional captivity. And it's not sustainable. The real turning point came when I stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped scanning the crowd to see if they were watching. When I focused entirely on my future, without trying to shape it into something someone else would admire, that's when I found peace. That's when the power returned, not because they saw me, but because I finally saw myself. You don't build real value by making someone regret losing you. You build it by no longer needing their recognition to know what they lost. At the end of the day, this isn't about revenge, ego, or proving anything to anyone. It's about reclaiming the energy you once gave away for free and choosing to invest it in yourself. You don't rise by being chosen, you rise by choosing yourself again and again, especially when it's hard. Let them feel the silence. Let them watch from a distance. Because your glow, your peace, and your standards aren't built for their validation. They're built for your future. And when you finally stop caring who looks back, you'll realize you were the prize all along.